to meet, to review and approve apps for privacy and safety. But we also knew we have like 9,000 teachers in our district. We want to empower you. What should you look for? And even if a tool has incredible privacy, when do you need to just stop and not use it because it is a grade book or it is something that's connected to an education record? So that's been our approach. And I would say we're really relying a lot on common sense, and Jeff and Bill will speak to their work. They're going to create tools that will, I believe, will empower districts across the country. But in the interim, we knew we needed to educate and empower. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we're doing that. But we really do have this core belief that teachers sit at the heart of this. Teachers really need to know what to do when they approach using an app. And one of the biggest things, and I'll stop with this, and Luke and I always say this to teachers, we put up a big slide, it says, I accept. And we say, how many times have you downloaded an app and just clicked accept without reading terms of service, the end user licensing agreement? And everybody in the audience says, I have, I say, I do it all the time. And if it's for me and my information being put in there, it's okay. But if you're a teacher and you're signing up 30 students or maybe 150, you need to read the terms of service. You have to. The end user licensing agreement. And then we have to educate you on what to look for. And then I feel like behind us, with people like Jim and Bill and the teams, they even have a deeper perspective about how to evaluate apps that will, I believe, come together here. So I will, Jim.
Okay. So the group that I work in Fairfax is the Technology Assessment Lab, and I think Fran said nicely, there's kind of three different approaches, and I think in a perfect world we'd all love to get to that empowered and educate, push this down to the classroom. I think that's one approach. The other approach is that central list. And I like Paul's approach, which I wrote down as ethical and transparent civil disobedience, which I think is kind of a nice, but kind of none of those kind of tick off the box of being compliant and safe and transparent. So we were basically in this world of like three really bad solutions. So the group that I work in, and I'm living in this world. This is our school board policy. Stuff goes through a curriculum review first. And then it comes to my group for testing. And basically my job description is I read privacy policies so you don't have to. And so we're about the same size as Philly. So even with our group, we couldn't scale this. So my take on this is we've had a checklist. So about two years ago, I went to Mike Lorian at Common Sense and said, we can't scale this. How can and no teacher in my district is going to come and read one of my technical reports. So I need to get this out where other people can see it. And I think the other piece that I want to share is, there are a lot of pockets of districts that are doing good things. I think it's really important to hear the voice of other districts and teachers because a lot of the conversation is happening with large districts. And, the way that Philly and Fairfax and other large districts approach things is really different than a small private school or the average school district of 2,500. So I think I would probably all agree the goal is to get the education and the tools down to the classroom level. That's an enormous lift in terms of work and scaling. But so how do we create tools that work just as well for a Philly or a Fairfax as a Baldwin school or some other different sized districts?
So, like I said earlier, I've been working with Bill for a number of years. My main focus is on building these tools to make it easier for everybody to do this. I think the important thing is is not to replace the process of critical thinking and applying your context specific needs for your school and your students, and determining if the privacy policies, including apps and websites, are appropriate for you. But constructing a framework around that so that all those common concerns that a lot of us share, we can build off of that. So Jim reviews an app. I maybe don't have to review the app as well if we have a common structure and framework for assessing the appropriateness of that in school. So a lot is really basically making sure that we aren't doing all the same work. So making sure that scales out and really shining a light on various different practices of vendors to make sure that they're being transparent about what they're doing, and then applying another level of context to see not only are they transparent, but do we like what they're doing as well? Because you need to be transparent and have more practices as well. I think transparency is a good first step, but you need that additional context to build off of that. So most of what I focus on is making sure we're doing the same work.
Yeah, like Jeff said, granted, we've been, so when Jeff and I were working together so Jeff and I joined Common Sense in July. Prior to that, we did a lot of work building actually, OER, OER repositories, and a lot of our work touched on student data privacy, both related to student data privacy. We kind of come into work from the perspective of teacher and learning, because one way of understanding privacy is to also understand who has the right to do what they want with somebody's intellectual level. And we talk a lot about student data privacy, but we often just forget the fact that it's actually student data that we need to be private about, and we often also approach it from the lens of protection as opposed to empowerment. Whereas, I think if we start to view students as empowered agents that control their own learning, there's a pedagogical shift there that occurs. It also improves privacy practice. So we tend to look at the work that we do around privacy as a way of making very concrete what it means when we talk about privacy. But privacy is not the end. Privacy is the means to achieve greater student autonomy and a greater level of student control over what they learn, how they learn, and the tools they use to learn. So that's, the compliance stuff is essential and it matters because this is the context within which, we all need to work. But compliance is a starting point. And when we can actually get the student back to the student data, we can start to have, I think, some higher level conversations about what privacy means. Glad to see somebody here from the humanities background, by the way. That was my teaching academic history for 16 years, so always 16 years.
We can't use computers, it's tricky.
one or two was good. Okay.
Can I ask a clarification question?
Yeah.
What's the difference between content and student data? Is there any
What's the question? The difference between student content and student data.
So, to me, that grades content is what I'm producing.
Right, but there's a huge gray area there as well because a student could write an essay that contains a lot of personal information in it.
And you won't find either of those terms in any law.
Okay.
Well, you're gonna see educational records.
Yeah.
So, as a student,
Yes.
I think content is work you produce and put online, like videos, blog posts, things like that. But more of the data is when you're going on Google and they're saying, you search for this, or they're tracking your location and things like that. And actually, I read a great book on that. It was about the filter bubble and how personalization is taking that data. I think that type of data collection is definitely data, and stuff the students themselves put out is definitely content.
So, blog doesn't distinguish.
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the things that's so challenging, and I think it's important. There's a big conversation going on about this, and a number of these laws are up for discussion. So I think it's important for folks to be knowledgeable and to push back on this. I mean, because this is somebody brought up SIPA. SIPA is simplistic compared to this. I mean, it basically
So you have to have a filtering system if you get E-rate money.
right. And I can hire Semantic and they'll categorize my websites. Until Jeff and Bill finish their work, there's nobody that's going to categorize this stuff. But it's really complicated, and kind of figuring out a simple way of talking about it. I mean, I kind of point to this as a kind of a humorous graphic. But Bill, a couple months ago, Bill sent me a note asking what are the things that we think about when we test software, and I said it would take me 1,000 words or give me 5 minutes and I'll do a picture. And this is kind of the flow chart that goes through in my head, and much of this is tongue in cheek, but it is kind of a good example of what happens. So you have the part where you're asking about complying with CAPA, and this only talks about just the compliance piece, which is the lowest level of needs. Talking about student privacy and the compliance piece is like talking about teaching the periodic table and saying, have you covered Bunsen burner safety? So asking things like things like, really, are you trying to get in the front page of the Washington Post? Is is one of those questions that we have that comes up a lot. So this is complicated, and it's really challenging. And I'm going to talk for a few minutes, just kind of lay some stepping stones for hopefully kind of where the conversation can go. But when I think about why this stuff is challenging, it's challenging because it's really emotional. These are things that people are really passionate about, and we're passionate about the affordances that these tools can have, but also when you talk to people with a different perspective, they're very, very passionate about their perspective. This has gotten to be one of the educational political issues, just like testing. In fact, some of the big initiatives that have been associated with privacy, like in Bloom, I think that one you saw that one commingle where it was taken down largely, for some people, taken down for privacy reasons, but it was really about objections to Common Core. I think that's at least one reasonable argument. Where that the conversation gets co-opted by a loud privacy voice.
And the thing of that is, that was what people often don't get about privacy, particularly in compliance areas. It's a zero-sum game because these things need to exist. So in Bloom going down was great for other vendors in the space because now people need to go to those other vendors. But anyways.
It's complicated, and there's it takes a lot of time to build up knowledge about this, and that's time that a lot of districts don't have. It's time away from something else, and in my district, trying to come up with that balance, we ask, okay, so how much time do we have to do that, educate and train with new incoming teachers to cover? This is one part of digital citizenship, and we say, okay, we have an hour, and that's what we have to cover this. So that's a particular challenge. But also, this is really kind of this conversation that happens in schools is very disconnected from the way that all of us use technology outside of schools. And it's a lot about, and I think another good thing to kind of think about in the conversation is about changing norms. Some of the things that we think, that we did with technology 15 years ago. 15 years ago, our district did parent permission slips just for being able to access the internet. In fact, we don't do that anymore. It's kind of rolled into the AUP, but that's kind of an evolving norm. I think kind of keeping norms in mind is a good thing. I saw there was an It's Complicated conversation going on at the same time. And I like in the Dana Boyd book, she talks about moral peril and just those things that kind of trigger these flare-ups. And she talks about the Sony Walkman and other things. But I think one of them, we always see this with any new technology kind of triggers these things. And it's usually kind of the women and children first panic. in the 1890s, it was electricity and lights. People could see inside of houses when there was electrical lights. So, this is nothing new. But just to kind of how do you kind of move these policies when norms don't move at the same speed, and they don't move at the same speed for all of your parents and all of your students?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So, two things come to mind. One, like 3 to 5 years out, like what's the floor that you would hope that most places are doing around privacy? And then the second one is, what narrative can be written that this isn't about fear? Because I know that people respond to fear, but that plateaus very quickly. So as you're thinking about this, I've been thinking about like, how do you write a narrative around privacy that isn't about fear?
So let me, just one quick question, sorry, back from you guys. Does anyone want to take a stab at a one sentence? What is privacy? Like when we're talking about privacy, but let's just talk for a second. What does that mean to you guys?
Your choice not to be transparent.
Keeping your IRS information.
Okay, keeping your information safe.
I just said a choice of not being transparent.
I like the choice word, but it's the choice of when it's important to release data and for what purpose, and being knowledgeable about making that choice. And that's the approach that we're taking.
Yeah.
As an individual, not like a teacher or a district person, privacy to me is having the right to own my information.
I attend the OC conference in DC, which is a great conference, a little up here. But one of the things that I keep thinking about is people were in a session complaining about privacy, and people are taking our data and they're doing this. And someone, I can't remember his name, from Brookings Institute said, everybody relax, and he talked about the privacy paradox and how we're so willing to give up our privacy because of the convenience. And so I think there's that I can separate my own personal privacy, and like you said, I can click that accept, but where I am losing sleep is what my responsibilities are to keep my students safe. And then, how do you educate teachers, because they're living 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when it was all fine and sharing information was just fine, and they don't have a concept of this. So for me, privacy paradox is one piece of this. And then I'm trying to drill down and just focus, because it's just so big. I just want to focus on what is my responsibility to my students.
So that's awesome. So these are so much higher level, higher quality answers than I usually get when I have this conversation. Yes, I remember you spoke on the panel at ISTE. Am I remembering that correctly?
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty good to see you again.
Oh.
You had some really fantastic observations.
So with privacy, one thing is definitely knowing what the companies and the app makers are collecting about you, because if anything, they're keeping that private. And it's like things you think are private are now the things they're keeping private. It's like this not transparent, not back and forth, not open thing that's making it become an issue.
That's awesome, and Bill wrote a blog post about related to this a couple days. Like, we're really talking about private and public. There are multiple publics, but when you share something, any secret shared with another person isn't a secret, and when you share something with the cloud, that person is always the cloud. So there really isn't such a thing as private. There's just multiple shades of less public. I don't want to say multiple privates, but less public. But for the educator concept, these are great definitions, because really, when you talk about privacy, it's about kind of control of information. It's not an anonymity or locking down information. And I think that's where we can have a good conversation about agencies. Really, when you talk about privacy, it's about control over information, and I think that kind of leads into a lot of the things that we want to have in the classroom. So just how to get to that, and compliance is kind of the biggest challenge.
There was a second part to the question, like how do we talk about this in a way that isn't fear-based? And I would love to, again, we'll run it up with the board. I would love to have all of us circle back at the end and kind of just do some thinking about that. Like there's some, I'm sure there's some thoughts that we all have, but that's, in some ways, that's a key question to allow us to move forward in a way that's both sane and responsible. So if you're okay with it, I would love to table that for now and get back to
I
that.
can jump into it one slide. So just we'll talk. So I mean, the laws really are kind of the things that make it complicated, but and to be honest, I think it's really almost impossible because there are so many and so many at the state level. I mean, I think it was you that talked about kind of what does a floor look like in 3 years, and given the challenges, given how complicated this is. I think the best that we frankly that we can hope for is what Paul has, which is kind of transparent civil disobedience. I think it's so hard to be 100% compliant with any of the laws. I think the most that is realistic is to be very clear about what you're doing and approach it ethically. I mean, the one thing that's common in all of these laws is permission. If you're transparent and you're getting permission, that's the one thing that's common in most of these. But I think to Bill's question, it's like, how do you move past the compliance conversation and kind of how do you talk about the fear conversation? And I think where I was hoping the conversation would go would be kind of how do you balance the whatever the challenges are in this bucket up here with compliance. But like to get past the fear part, you kind of have to balance the compliance piece with, are you actually private and secure? And I think you had talked about kind of you're sharing this with, the various companies, even if it's private. You can be, I could be completely compliant with the laws and still not be safe or private. And then there's that third piece, which is how are you perceived by your teachers, your parents, your students, your community? And sometimes kind of that's the one that we worry about that drives the fear conversation the most. So kind of I'm interested in kind of seeing what folks have to say kind of about how do you balance these. Bill or Brandon, other things you want to kind of add into the balancing this piece? Or how do you move forward balance?
I think our next slide is moving forward. Is that the
Yeah.
next slide?
Yeah.
So I would say that it's complicated and the laws are very dense. But I have to say, as a former teacher, that we have to figure out a way to say, here are some things you need to know, so that when you look at an app, at least you know what you're looking for. Now I'm going to say this. We are trusting that app or that program is telling us the truth. So let's just start right there. Now, if they're not, there's some sanctions for them, but let's just say they're telling us the truth. We need to, and this has been Philadelphia's perspective on this, like 4 perspectives. We need to help teachers say, what are those things? Well, you want to read the privacy policy, like that's a must. You need to know, is the data securely transferred? Like none of us, I'm not like Jim or Bill, I'm not, but we want to see that there's encryption. We're teaching teachers these words. You need to know the data is encrypted. You need to know that you have data ownership. You need to know the data is not mined. You need to know that it's not aggregated or shared with anyone. These are like basics. And again, we're not doing that back-end testing. We're trusting the vendor. But what we have now is people going in, thinking this looks great, and using it. So we want to say to teachers, stop. And it is very imperfect. This is an imperfect solution, but it's better than saying, I I love to do. So I love the rubric approach, and it is an imperfect approach, but it is a huge, giant leap from doing nothing. Huge. And I think teachers understand reading, the necessity of reading, and the necessity of understanding some basic evaluation criteria, basic. So I know I've been with a lot of principals and teacher leaders, and they're like, I'm not a lawyer, I can't do this. Well, then I say, don't sign your students up for anything. Don't do it. Don't do it. Because you could be signing them up for something where the data is being collected and aggregated. And I will also say that I feel like we are living in a world right now where the notion of Big Brother is something we can barely even imagine, because everything we post, every place we check in is just being collected. And our digital identity is so robust. And we were at a forum in DC where there were some, I don't think they were researchers, but ethnographers, that were talking about this scary probability that not too far in the future, people will determine about where you check in, what you like, what your future should be. So I think we have to be careful and teach teachers and kids and students.
So question, so if you don't sign your students up for anything, how do you make sure you're not cutting them off for opportunities that you find online?
The conversation with teachers is this. We're vetting a lot of tools. And let me make this clear for teachers. At this point, our end is privacy and security. There's also the educational efficacy side of it. Like, is it good? Is it interesting? Is it meaningful? So the choice is this. Pick from something other people have reviewed, that you know the data is safe, or please read the privacy policy. Do one or the other, but please don't do that. It's not like don't use anything. Either read the privacy policy with your nascent new information about how to read it, or pick from something. But where we live now, we know this. People are signing everyone up. We have app developers creating apps with no security, no privacy policy, and people are using them. So I think we need to start taking those steps forward. So it's not like don't use it.
One other thing too, I think a lot of times there's a mindset that innovation comes through an app. And one of the things that I always encourage people to ask is, you talk about making connections with and there's something to be said for the accidental connections that you don't know it will happen and are going to be valuable. And I think if we get too prescribed here, we run the risk of shutting off those kind of fortuitous opportunities. But one of the other things too, a lot of times teachers they'll sign up for an app because they feel that that's the only way to stay current. So I think one thing that I always like to ask is like, how does this particular piece of technology further any educational goals? And if there's not like a 2-sentence explanation, then it's either like the goals need to be rethought, the app needs to be rethought, or the teacher can just say, again, I'm hoping, like, it's all to me, it's okay to experiment. It's just, you should actually own your experimenting, I think. Does that make sense?
David, you got a comment?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull a few things together in my mind. It seems like there's a gray area that's pretty, one is we gotta be clear that this is gray. And everyone, you're trying to empower students to make these decisions. And if they're truly educated, they can come to a decision about an app that's different than the teacher's decision about it. So the teacher's saying, hey, let's all use this. But a student has a different perspective of that's more privacy than I'm willing to give up. And they make the decision that they don't want to use that app. Where does that classroom stand? Where does the school district stand when there's this difference of opinion? Because it seems like this is our opinions about
Comment or
so I guess I'll reply to that. What I hear Bill saying is that the app isn't the end game. So in the classroom, a teacher is suggesting to use an app that the end is a product or a purpose, a goal that you're getting to. And if a student themselves didn't want to use that app, then there are other means to get to that same end. That app is, if you can't use the app, you're done. But that's just one way to get to your
And
goal.
it's an online discussion. You can't participate in an online discussion. Google Docs for themselves are, you know.
So,
So in Philadelphia, we had to make the decision of what we call a sanctioned source system. Because seeing where some of the laws are going, where parents can opt out, we had to say, these are things you cannot opt out of. And we didn't see this at first, but then we realized we can't have a parent opt out of the Google environment. So we went full in with Google, we have our own contract with them. So if it is another app that a teacher finds and they go through the rubric and they think it's fine, but the student says no, the student can opt out of that. But a student cannot opt out of, they can't have their name extracted from Google. And they say to the teacher, I'm not going to do that assignment, I'll do it on pen and paper, but they still have to do it. So we are trying to set the standards up. Source systems, you can't opt out of. Other non-source systems, you can, but then you still have to do the work in another way. And we're just getting a couple parents in.
just one quick comment, because the topic of good practices came up a bunch. So I think kind of that's an example that's worth talking about. One of the things that I see in terms of looking at what other school districts are doing, and one of the things that's kind of emerging as a good practice is school districts that are being transparent and listing the tools that they're using on their website. If you're in New York, from New York State, this is a requirement now. But some of the things that I've seen as good practices is they list the tool, they list the information, the link to the privacy policy. There's a school district in Canada which kind of has a different approach to privacy than we do in the US. They take the approach of also providing a list of alternative tools if it's one of those kind of non-core tools that the parent has a concern about and they want to use a different tool for, say, making, they don't want to use the cloud version, they want to use something else. So just kind of tying this together to some of the conversations about good practices. So comment?
Yeah, and what's your name?
Miriam.
Miriam. Yeah, Miriam, and then what's your name?
Oliver.
Miriam and Oliver.
So on the flip side of that question, I know sometimes it's hard to students might not be considering something because, especially younger students, so it's sometimes hard for them to make the choice. But on the other hand, if the teacher or the school district blocks a website or an app that the student and their parents are okay with, what do we do then?
I would say the only websites that are blocked and will not be opened are violent and pornographic sites. Sometimes websites get caught up in that filter, and there's actually a presentation someone's doing tomorrow on Philly's process. So teachers have a way to log in and say, I want to use this website, please open it, and a committee of teachers looks at it and say, oh, it's just a website for communicating or posting things, and it gets open. So that's the process.
And also, I think the filtering conversation, I think is going to happen. There's actually in the next year, nationally, I think there's going to be a lot of focus on the filtering conversation because with some of the STEM initiatives coming out of the White House, filtering could potentially be a barrier to some of that. So I think there's a lot to cover about. One other issue with filtering that never really gets talked about is in the filtering software, there's actually an enormous data trail of what every single person does in that interaction, and talking about who has access to that, how that's secured, how that can be reviewed by people whose data is in there, there's a privacy angle on that as well. And you also see the ACLU is going after filters, there are a few folks that are actually going after filters hard. It's going to be an interesting space in the next year. I don't know enough to answer your question well.
I mean, don't you think as the cost of data goes down and becomes a commodity, that students are just not going to use school filters, right?
Oh yeah.
They'll have a hotspot that costs them $30 a year with all the data they ever want. And then our filters will be non-existent usage unless schools start to say like, well, we're gonna put jamming devices in our schools to make sure they have to be on our filters.
Which is illegal.
Right, okay, but it's gonna be a commodity
Right.
that our filters are gonna be non-existent matters for kids.
So in my district, our version of the Science Leaders Academy, folks, students pull together and chip in on MiFis to do that. So that's already been happening for years in ours. I think at some point I want to circle back to just kind of put a pin in the fear conversation, because I think that's really important.
If you could actually go Oliver, then
Because there's so many shades of gray, I thought I'd ask a clear question. It's something about the future, but that's all. I really like that you brought up in the beginning how people freaked out about electricity because you could see inside houses. And I actually think that's a perfect example right now because when I come into this building and I turn on the lights or I walk on the floor, I'm not concerned about the floor giving out underneath me or a fire starting. I am the last person you ever want to wire a house, but I will come in here and turn on the lights without any fear because engineers who are much smarter than me have set standards that I wholeheartedly trust. How far are we from a place with privacy where I mean this with kindness, when I don't have to come to this meeting?
Right. That's an excellent question. And so I'm going to have a fear debate between Bill and I now, because I think that's a great point on this one. I mean, objectively, from a law perspective, thinking of things like the health regulations, the finance regulations, when we do sector-based privacy regulation in the States versus Europe, there's a little bit more stringency around the health laws, but if you just, there have been litanies of data breaches in the health market, so that clearly, having a little bit more regulation hasn't made a huge amount of difference. But how many people would have this conversation in their doctor's office about privacy? And we're both professional groups, so I think kind of that moral panic thing is there is something about education and that does kind of trigger this. I want to take a little bit of a different.
That's why.
I want to take a little bit of a different take than Fran. I'm a little bit more contextual on the fear aspect. Just as a technologist, there are so many more things that I'm worried about past the data that's being collected in my school. When almost all of my of our students are walking around with a GPS tracker in their pocket, essentially as a phone. Any student that is Googling information that an average 16-year-old might Google on WebMD, that information is making its way into a data broker, and there's the information that's collected in schools in terms of risk, and that's what we're really talking about, risk. And I think in a conversation about risk, you have to acknowledge that the opposite side of risk is reward. I mean, you don't make any money burying it in a jar in the basement. And sometimes we treat technology and managing risk in schools like if we were burying money in our backyard. So I think that's the balance. So in a conversation about technology and risk, you kind of have to talk about how likely is something and how impactful it is. And in my opinion, the kinds of risks and probabilities that we deal with is definitely in the middle of the spectrum. There's an awful lot of stuff on the far side. And I don't have an example in my district of a data risk with an app vendor stealing. I have dozens of examples of somebody on staff accidentally emailing a spreadsheet of data, or the CIO of Montgomery County School District doing a national presentation and using live student data in his slides. These are the kinds of things that are actually really happening. So in this conference, this is all really important stuff. But I think it's important to keep it in balance and not be dismissive or overly fearful. And Bill will tell me I'm wrong.
Well, I would also say, so there's data collection, which is a serious issue, but for me, like the data collection is that's where the genie starts to leave the bottle, but then it's the data recombination, which is that's where bad things happen visibly. And to get a sense, I mean, just to get a sense of kind of what that data recombination looks like, there are three very easy plugins you can get for Firefox. You can get a cookie reader, which lets you read every cookie that gets set. You can also get a piece of software called Privacy Badger from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And the third one I'm going to recommend with an enormous caveat for reasons that will become obvious. The third one that I use is Ghostery. But Ghostery is actually owned, ironically, by an advertising company. So you actually, as you are installing this, you need to deselect data sharing. And what these three, the cookie reader is obviously lets you read cookies. Privacy Badger and Ghostery track trackers on the site. So the reason you turn Ghostery off is because you don't want all of your information about your browsing habits getting sent to somebody else. But Ghostery maintains a pretty good list of third-party trackers. So just take a look at those third-party trackers. And then look for things like DoubleClick. Just go and then go and actually do some of this, like go do a search on WebMD, and then in your cookie reader, take a look at the cookies that get set and the referral information that's there. Because your search string, what you search for on WebMD is included there, which then gets sent. It gets sent onto the site. So, and then take a look at the different ad trackers that get set. And if you go to the New York Times, to WebMD, to YouTube, your DoubleClick ID is the same on all those sites. So again, like it's you. So there's different ways of it, and this is less a school issue and more just a technology issue, but that's one of the reasons why I think starting a conversation about how this happens in schools is key. We are now also totally off the rails. So I think
I think we hit the fear part pretty well.
I think one other thing to get back to Oliver's question about when are we going to not have to show up something like this, I don't see that in the future at all, really. And that's partly because the industry as it exists now for technology companies, they're really, for the most part, they're all advertising companies. So, that's just, you have a huge ethical dilemma there as far as, if we're going to rely on this technology, which is delivered through an advertising company, you're kind of already on the wrong foot. I think part of that will have to shift is culturally that we'll have to get used to paying for things, I think is what comes down to it. Right? I don't see that willingness currently.
So I think the alternative to that is...
Yeah, Mr. Booth was waiting for a bit, I'm sorry.
You hit my big concern. It's not so much the technology, what people do with it, right? And then defining privacy. So in my school, we almost identified ourselves. Anything that's within the school is private. Some people may say it's public, but we consider it private. So if your example about using live student data for presentations, well, we think that in our school, because it's private, that's okay. And we're starting to get some, pushback against that, whether or not we can determine for ourselves the bubble, I guess, or boundaries of privacy within our institution.
But I would say FERPA is very clear on that. If you are an educator, if we both educate the same students and we're looking at the student data and we're serving those students, it's fine. When you bring it into a presentation of a group of people, then you're violating the law. But if it's teachers serving those students, is that a clear distinction?
That's that.
And just to add on that, and I think if I ever said FERPA is very clear, I'll probably be struck by lightning. But the example that's in the middle, I mean, it's I think we're pretty clear on those ends. But let me give you one in the middle, a data wall. So, that's kind of a very different example. It's still inside the school walls, but you might be projecting, somebody might develop an application that creates a data wall and you want to project it, and now that's visible.
With student names, right? With student names,
this is
that
much
anybody
different
can
than the classic posting grades by student ID on the list outside the classroom. So I think pushing into that gray area is where good conversations happen. I think the edges are less.
So I just say that, the future conversation is interesting, and to your point as well, because I wrote a book called Hacking Happiness. I don't know if anyone's read that book, but what if in the future, not too far future, we own the data and we're the ones selling it and deciding who can use it and when they use it, right? Yeah. It changes a lot of the conversation, because right now people are making billions of dollars off of us but that could change, in the future.
Yeah.
So, I guess this question of what we do internally, I think is a really important one, because I don't think students or parents understand what we are doing with that data internally. And so things do come up sometimes when we're passing information to other people within our school, right? And part of the issue, there's lots of wonderful promises and potential that we're told about being able to take all this data that we're collecting from students internally and then use it to analyze what's going on, to intervene with students who are in trouble, or to identify students before they really get too far down the road, which I think on some level is incredibly positive, with the potential to really use this data to collect about students in positive ways. But some of that data can be considered to be incredibly intrusive. And if we're collecting it, certainly we have to be sure that we're keeping it in ways that we don't expose it at any point, because some of that can have long-term consequences for those students, right? How do we begin? How do we balance the potential to intervene in a student who's in trouble with us collecting data? I'm just going to give you one specific example, right? So we've been working on a form that if a faculty member or a student or a teacher or administrator has a concern about a student, that they can submit it to this centralized, because you're never sure, like, if this problem, who do I talk to about that? Or so the idea is a centralized form where all of these concerns would be submitted, and then they would get routed to the right people. It's a bit more efficient, it makes sense, it helps students get the resources. What do we do with those records? Do we keep those records? How long do they last?
I'm going to respond by how I think this is best practice, and my colleagues can disagree. When you're collecting behavior data, as discipline data, transcript data, attendance data, anything that is like part of that education record, very sensitive personal data. The system that whereby you collect it has to have a contract where you own the data, you know where the data is secured, you have a right to the data being destroyed at the end of the contract. And if you're using a homegrown system, then I think you need to be concerned about the trackers and different things Jim and Bill might tell you about to see who can pull that data. But if you're in a secure system, you need to, I believe you have to have a contract, or you have to have your own IT build something that you know is secure. It cannot be some free tool or passing data back and forth via email, for example.
Right. So from just kind of tying that back to the compliance things and trying to figure out what the heck FERPA is, really that goes to the piece in FERPA that lets us use third parties, which is, do we have direct control? And that's kind of what you have to go back to. And there are a lot, having a contract is kind of the easiest way to say you have direct control.
But and the one certifiably wrong answer there is the vendor has full control over when it gets deleted. Right. Like that's the one answer that is indisputably thoroughly wrong. Right. But but in a situation where you were using a vendor as essentially secure data storage, which is kind of what that is. The data in this case is information about students. It would make sense. So this is where there's a technical solution, which is a secure data storage. But then there's also the university or the school process, which is, okay, if you have a concern, you can send it in. And then perhaps at the end of every semester, at the end of every academic year, the people who are charged with reviewing those records review with an eye towards aggressively deleting. And then if there's a student who does seem to be having issues or needs additional support, at that point, a decision can be made about whether those are notes, which don't need to be protected as an educational record, or perhaps maybe should be part of a student's educational record to ensure that they get the support. But that's a privacy decision. That's really like a school, education or mental health decision. It has privacy implications, but if it's not predicated on you as the having complete control, then that's the only way to ensure you get a wrong answer. But this is why it's complicated, because there's the technical issues of storage, which often get conflated with the organizational process, which need to make sure that responsible handling is occurring. And most organizations will punt on you on their work, just be like, the vendors may be hard. And it's like, no, actually the vendor is doing what they say they're going to do in some ways, but you need to get your process together. So that's where I think there's a level where sometimes schools will often be cowed by or hide behind something that they can push off as external instead of owning their role and actually being proactive in fixing it.
So kind of taking this one bite at a time, I think Fran's kind of able to find that kind of things that are educational records, and we have to have a degree of control. So like, where can we move forward in this? And I kind of want to tie a bit of the points that Adam broke up, and Miriam and Jeff, the work that you're doing with Domain of One's Own. So Miriam, you talked about, what if a student wants to use an application? You talked about kind of people owning their own data. So, the area where I think FERPA is either very gray or opens up some opportunities is, what about when something isn't under the direct control of a district? And to me, I don't know, and the Department of Ed doesn't know. They can't tell me if it's a loophole or a don't go. But in the case of Domain of One's Own, or the kind of the classic 9th grade English, when I was doing it, it was the marble bound notebook. But if you say go and create your own blog, this is one where I have to be honest. I can't tell you what the law says about this, but I think the educational record stuff is pretty clear what we have to do. So where are the areas that we can explore and kind of push for clarification, see if we can get some meaningful agency. It's in that area where it's not controlled by the district, where it's controlled by the learner. And I think that's kind of where it's useful to kind of push the conversation. So is there anything you want to say about kind of Domain of One's Own, and how you're under FERPA just like we are?
Sure.
So how do you approach that from the issues that we've talked about today?
Yeah, well, let me start with the pure caveat of privilege here, that I work at a university level, and it's not our students are not getting close. So that's does open up certain things for us. But we have anything that students do online, they always have the ability to use a pseudonym for. We do talk about that. But we every student who comes in can get their own domain, can get their own hosting, and we integrate it into our first year seminars, we integrate it into methods classes, we integrate it into career services. But we do so with a beginning conversation about digital identity, about owning your identity online, and understanding what that identity looks like, and how you should be all constantly aware of what it is you're doing in the online space, and be aware that there are these connections, right? We have that whole conversation about trackers. We have them look at their cookies for a week and see how different ads show up. Like, wait, that thing I was looking at on Amazon is also on Facebook, is also on the New York Times, is also, right? So again, we really sort of begin with education and then double down on the fact that this is not about fear. This is about controlling your own identity and demanding that your data starts and begins with you, and then you choose where it goes out from there.
So I'm going to push that a little bit more. Yes, there is a clear-cut in FERPA distinction between secondary and higher education. I think there's actually a little bit of wiggle room in this one. So I was going through the congressional record on FERPA, and there is some language in there that implies that there is a possibility of high school students having some level of control in terms of granting permission. So I think that's something that I'm seeing it in there. It's not something that, to the best of my knowledge, anyone's ever explored. But I'm kind of interested from the schools. What would that look like if there was the ability within FERPA for 16 and 17-year-olds to be able to have the ability to give permission, like parents do? What would we need to have in place to make that useful beyond just compliant?
should we move forward? If you want to answer the question or maybe answer some of these questions if we haven't.
Kind of make a comment about what's up on the screen. Sure. It's a preliminary work for what we're building out. This is a portion of what we're doing for tracking the privacy policies in terms of service for various different apps and websites. This does different textual analysis to sort of basically pull out some facts about the different policies so that we can sort of compare them across the board. What does the industry look like? There's various different readability ones here. You can argue the merits of those, but what this does do is give you an idea of what, like grade level, there's a flesh grade level, this particular policy takes, a ninth grade education will let you understand it. I've seen some that require, I think, as high as 18 years post-college education level to understand the terms of service and privacy policy. So there's a lot that we can do to put pressure on the industry to improve their transparency. There's other ones like what I've called the shouting index, which basically captures the percentage of words that are all capitalized in the privacy policy. Because, and I think that's important for several reasons. The Supreme Court's ruled several times that that has no legal precedence. There's no reason to put anything in all caps. It doesn't have any, it's not more or less binding than just writing the words out. And there's plenty of research that says it's actually harder to understand words that are in all capitals. So, this is a way that we can sort of apply the same lens to everybody generically and say, we all need to do better. Let's be more transparent about this. So we'll be doing this, and Bill and I will be probably writing a few blog posts to sort of point out people that are doing this really well as showing you what the industry average is as far as what it is, and basically providing suggestions so that this space gets easier to navigate as we go forward.
Two questions. So the first is, in your experience, how often is it that industry developers, providers, aren't following regulations, mostly because it's incredibly difficult to figure out what regulations are supposed to be followed, versus those who are very intentionally kind of being dubious because they've got some other hidden agendas? And then in your experience of that latter of these dubious companies, are there any examples where it's like, wow, those people are really, doing a very, very horrible, unethical thing? Or is it, more of these kind of just clueless, they don't realize what they're doing, all of a sudden they're enabling some practices, through multiple degrees of separation to something that's horrible happening?
So that's a tough one because we're relying on what they say. So if we don't know if that matches up with what they're actually doing. So I think, erring on the side of being generous, I think most people have good intentions. They're trying to do well and maybe are probably ignorant or uninformed around the various different legal issues and navigating that. Bill's had a few interactions with various different companies pointing out their privacy policies are maybe a little off the mark, and had very productive conversations, moving that forward, educating them, bringing forward. So I think that provides some merit that there are good actors out there, people trying to do well and maybe just need a little nudge in the right direction, a little help onboarding. As far as the folks that maybe have questionable practices, there's some that are very transparent about the awful things they're doing with people's data, which I would actually argue is a good thing, that they're transparent about it, because then that's on us to read those policies and say, no, I don't like those terms. So, it's, again, like all of this, it's a huge gray area.
And sorry, I didn't mean to go off, but this whole student privacy pledge business, does that have any, where is that in your opinion? Because I know there was a push towards that. Many, I even had contact with them oh, what's this all about? But then I know there were companies on that list who, when I even read their privacy policy, wait a minute, that seems a little sketchy. Or they were actually still doing things, even though their names were on that list.
So Tony Porterfeld is a guy, his site is edtechinfosec.org. He's done some great research, including research on some pledge signatories, looking at their privacy and security practices that I could say appear to fall short of the pledge, but they just fall short. They just fall short. They're wording pretty data. It's just so. But with that said, I think Jeff kind of nailed, nobody wakes up in the morning and it's I can't wait to screw some kids today.
Okay.
Nobody's waking up trying to do that. They're doing it because, I think they don't understand how to do it. I think a lot of times, especially early stage startups, they don't have any place to get good advice. So they go with what they think they know, and then they end up, being written up somewhere as being an example of what not to do, and it's completely out of left field for them.
So part of that is their peers are other tech companies, which maybe aren't focused on education, where you have a different set of concerns, where you're making choices on behalf of students. Very different level of responsibility there. So that's their peers who they look around saying, what should we be doing? And then that's inappropriate in this context.
But the pledge is a signal, but it's not a stamp of approval. 8 out of the 10 pledge items are mandatory under federal law. If you're not doing them, you're breaking a federal law. And all 10, if you're in California, you have to comply with them. And the other very quick comment on privacy policies, and it's a non-charitable comment, I think the question is, are the privacy policies even relevant about what the developer is actually doing? I think there's more plagiarism in privacy policies than there is in our schools.
But yeah, I mean, one good, teacher PD trick is just when you're looking at a privacy policy, go 2 paragraphs down and grab like a 7 to 10 word chunk, put it in quotations and do a Google search. See what you get back. If you get back more than 3, there's an issue. On a lot of these, you'll get back like 40,000, 50,000 hits. And that's a sign that a vendor has, that multiple vendors have actually just lifted their terms from somebody, or they've all bought the same boilerplate.
If it says it can't be used in a nuclear facility, that's probably a good indication.
Yeah, no, I mean, but I do this, and I look for phrases that have like an atypical word, and just again, I mean, some of it's actually be a good humanities exercise. You just one of the things that's fun about the stuff Jeff is doing is like there actually is a perverse style of privacy policies, and you can start to see these patterns emerge over time, but from a PD place, like if you just want a quick flag for teachers, like go again, just find a 7 to 10 word phrase, do a search on it. If you get more than 3 hits back, that's a sign that you need to look at that app a lot more closely. If you don't, that's not a sign that everything's great either. There's still more work to be done. But if you want to save yourself the hassle of reading a policy, find it in the playground.
So I'm wondering, even though many of these apps are free,
Actually, they're not free. Somebody else is paying for it.
Understand, good clarification.
Yeah.
But it seems like the market would, if there was a breach of data, and that company was abusing, it seems like the market would correct it. There would be word that this is a bad thing. I'm thinking the obvious one is actually Madison, but that's a bad example for school. But if a company screws up and doesn't adhere to it, it seems like at some point there would be some whistleblowing going on. I'm not sure.
Anybody here stop shopping at Target?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. Why wouldn't you? Why would you keep doing it?
I think kind of on that norms conversation, there's an enormous disconnect between what people shout about and how they behave. So that's another thing to consider.
I think there's something different between a breach and a company that is just aggregating and selling your data to an advertising company, which is also illegal, right? For student data and so, I mean, I think we have about 5 minutes left.
Can we jump to Google?
Yeah, some questions. So
I'll just click on
yeah,
Google.
So I'm going to say a few words about some of these things here. So one, I'm going to say again for teacher, PD, student agency, and parent partnerships. I've been thinking you can really tell that we're a diverse group. Like I guess like real IT got right, real IT people, teacher. I really believe that as complicated as it is, you need to look for some. You can look at Philadelphia's site, look at other sites, find ways to make this understandable to all of your constituencies. Because if we just say it's too complicated, we can't do it, and do nothing, that's the worst thing that can happen. For Google, I will say this, that Melanie Harris mentioned this, the way some districts approach this, and this is really hard work, we have a signed contract with Google. Not for everything in the App Store, but for the foundational tools, docs, slides, sheets. They commit that it's our data. We'll delete it when it's not shared, it's not used for advertising, it's not mined. So for us, all the stuff that's been swirling around about Google, does not apply. Now, it's so easy not to have a contract. It's just so easy.
But what about when they go to a site and says you need to log in, and your Google pops, or you can click on Google and it pops up, and they just go through with their school account, and then teachers think that that's okay because it's through Google.
That's not okay. See that, and that's where the education piece comes in, and that's what got us on this road, because Google enables that so easily that we wanted to say there's a difference between working in this core suite. Once you step out of the core suite, now we're talking about education and empowering teachers, but educating and empowering.
Well, and it's also worth noting that the core suite, basically there are Google apps that are not part of Google's core apps for education. So, for example, like advanced search history is not part of Google Apps for Education. So it's not covered by any secondary contract. So there are really 4 privacy ecosystems within Google Apps. There's the core services. There's there's Google Apps which are not part of the core services. There's apps that are integrated with Google Apps that aren't part of Google. And then there's all of the websites that kids sign into or teachers sign into with their Google accounts. Each one of those is a different privacy ecosystem that has its own unique and contextual considerations.
If anybody, this is a big topic, so if anybody needs to dive deeper into this one, find me. I think I probably run the largest domain or one of the largest 3 in the country. So I'm the admin for Fairfax, and I negotiated our Google contract. So I can, if you need help with this, it's
When I have questions on Google, Jim's where I call.
But to know those 4 like slices and everyone in your world, teachers understand.
The quick one on this one is read the EFF complaint with a very large amount of salt.
I think, I guess my big question is, as you said, it's so easy just to sign up for Google and not to do a school contract. Do you have this sort of 1-sentence answer to tell a colleague as to why they shouldn't say, hey, everyone make a Google address right now, and why that's a bad thing because of that ecosystem?
Sure. Well, so I think what's important to clarify here is when you say that, you're saying create a consumer Google account, as opposed to what we're all dealing with, which is the Google Apps for Education account.
Yes.
So the most important thing, and terms of service is a contract. It's just a one-way contract with all the benefits on one party, as opposed to a negotiated contract. The most important phrase in the entire contract is the section that starts out that says, Google acknowledges that they are a school official according to FERPA. That's the most important phrase in the contract. And that's the biggest distinction. You don't have that with the consumer account.
But I would also say, if you're looking for the 1 sentence to convince your administrators that this is important, so what we say is, if you want us to have any level of control of what a student is doing with that, and we just focus on the Gmail because that's like more understandable to administrators, and you want them to be, and they're talking to their teachers via email, if you don't have a contract and it's not part of, we call it a walled garden, then we virtually have no lens into what that conversation looks like. So it's a little scary, but it's gotten our administrators to understand.
So yeah, let me define this. So yeah, if I can, it's not we're reading 200,000 emails, but we happen to have, maybe none of you have this, issues where sometimes adults act inappropriately. Adults. And if we cannot grab that conversation, the kids are basically, the students are basically on their own. So I know many of you never deal with this, but we deal with it all the time. Adults being inappropriate with children in bad ways. So that's a security. That's like a security piece for us. The other piece is that they promise not to mine the data. We have unlimited storage. You know, there's a lot of perks to being inside the education domain.
So puts it into less of a gray area.
Yes,
it
gets flat.
Less gray area.
You want to, last question, comment of the day?
Question. So the thing is, there's the one hand where after you're given a school account, you might create a Google account, but on the other hand, some people come into a school and they already have a Google account. So, for example, I had one for years before I came to high school, and then I got a science leadership email, and we were encouraged to well, not necessarily encouraged, but like we were showed how to connect them so that we could check both emails at once, which can be very handy. But then the problem is sometimes these websites will automatically go to the consumer one if you're connected to accounts. But the problem is, what do you do then if you want to check your other email that you've had for years? Or just use that Google service, it becomes an issue.
Well, my response would be that in school, teachers should use safe tools, and Domain is a safer tool. And as individuals, like I have a private account, you have a private account, I can continue to use that privately. I can use both.
Separate them.
Right.
And it's a good practice for being, preparing our students for the real world, because in the real world, you go to work and you're going to do your work on your work address. And if you are like Hillary Clinton, you learn why you can't do that pretty quickly. But it is an important way that we all work. When we're in a professional environment, we have a different account than when we do our personal.
Learn to separate your life.
And I'm remember my parent hat here. When my kid goes to school, I have my kid use personal stuff because there's a level of control that my kid would not have otherwise. And so it's like, because for me, you talk about going to work, like, given that my kid will be working in a world where there's monitoring increasingly happening, I actually want them knowing how to break that and how to obfuscate that and how to basically shed some noise on top of the system to make it more difficult. So that's another, this is where like, yeah, because as a parent, I have very conflicted feelings about that. Because the safety piece resonates, but so does the agency control. And given a choice, I will always default agency control.
I'm hard to cat a dad like you that can educate them. I would agree.
But I mean, also, there's some resources to be, again, we went totally off the rails.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, and I hope it was okay. We have some resources at the end of this. This deck will be available with those resources shortly after this today. It'll probably take a couple hours just to put it live. It will, as of like Wednesday, there'll be a spot on the Common Sense Media blog to talk about this stuff. I'll put it on my blog, which is funnymonkey.com. Jeff and I will right there. Jim, is there a place where you will be putting this?
Yeah, I'll probably put it on mine at K-12 Cloud Learning. But I'll have my email around, so feel free to drop me an email. I talk to tons of school districts about this stuff.
Right.
And there is no one right answer.
Ours will be on our philasd.org like main pages. You also see the direct URL right here. Definitely available to talk about it. It's a topic we're passionate about and love to collaborate with other districts.
Is the slide deck going to go into the conversation link on the Educon website?
Yeah. I'll there too.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.